Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're wrestling with source material that is so far outside the conventional economic discourse. It almost reads like science fiction.
It really does.
And yet it comes from one of the world's most influential technological futurists. We're talking about Elon Musk's, his radical predictions for the very near future.
Indeed. We've been digging into his recent conversations, particularly the one with Nikhil Kamath, and the claims are genuinely monumental. This isn't a chat about, next quarter's earnings.
Yeah.
It's about an economic singularity, a point of technological acceleration where all the traditional rule, the ones governing human labor and resources, they just break down entirely.
And crucially, this isn't for some far-off date like 2100. Musk is saying we are right on the precipice of this change.
Right now.
So our mission today is to dissect this forecast, this idea that AI and robotics will so fundamentally alter our place in the economy that work becomes optional. And maybe the most astonishing part is that this technological tsunami is the only thing that he thinks can fix these massive geopolitical problems, like the crippling U.S. national debt.
Right. We're dealing with incredibly aggressive timelines and world-changing implications here. If you take these sources at face value, the next 20 years are going to rewrite the entire human employment contract, redefine money, and restructure global finance, all at the same time.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start with the most dramatic, the one that really strikes at the core.
It'll probably foster humanity. But it's very important that
The end of work.
that a train to
Work
be honest,
becomes
even
optional. I mean, it's a
if that
concept
truth
that's
is
been floating
unpopular.
around for decades, but what makes Musk's
Like how about
predictions
I
so
call perhaps
radical
the
is
Galileo
clock.
test.
The timeline, yeah.
Less than 20 years,
So when
maybe
Galileo
even as little as 10 or 15.
built a
And that
telescope and looked at
aggressive
the moons of Jupiter
timeline is
and
based
said he thinks
entirely
probably
on the
Earth
speed
revolves
of
around the
AI
sun.
development.
He was granted a
He
heretic.
doesn't see this as a
and
gradual
was,
evolution. He actually
forced
calls
to
it a
recant
supersonic
or
tsunami.
be
Supersonic
executed.
The idea is that we're seeing this
And
exponential growth
If you trained
in
an
both
AI at the time,
intelligence and
it would
dexterity in
have
machines.
said that
That's just
the sun revolves
far
around the Earth,
outpacing
because that's what
any kind
everybody
of
thought.
institutional change, or even our own ability
even
to
if,
really grasp
even
the
if it
consequences.
concluded
You know,
that
when people
that's actually
hear
not true,
AI taking
if
jobs,
it
they
was
usually
concerned
think
about the truth,
call
it wouldn't
centers
actually
and
say the truth. So it needs to
coding.
say the
Sure,
truth
white-collar
and know the
But
truth,
the source
even if the
material
truth is
focuses
unpopular,
so heavily
which
on
no AI
replacing
can do yet.
physical labor at a massive scale, all driven by humanoid robots.
Absolutely. The tangible mechanism here is the production and deployment of millions of physical robots like Optimus. Musk has said that Optimus production is expected to scale up very rapidly, possibly even starting next year. Millions of them. And if you introduce millions of general-purpose robots that can do physical, skilled, even complex manual labor, well, the marginal value of human physical labor, which underpins so much of our global economy, it just collapses.
If the robot is cheaper, faster, and more reliable, then any job tied to just getting something done becomes immediately automated.
Precisely. And that's how the concept of optional work really happens. Labor shifts from being a necessity for survival to being a matter of personal choice. He uses this great analogy of growing your own vegetables.
Right.
Some people might genuinely love doing it. They find it fulfilling, but you don't have to do it to live. It becomes a hobby, a passion project, not an economic requirement.
But I have to push back on that a little. Our sources note that Musk himself admits humans are, in his words, innately competitive. We define ourselves by our work, by contributing, by the status it gives us. If survival is just guaranteed, what fills that immense psychological void?
And that is the essential challenge of the singularity he's describing. He's confident the technology will guarantee abundance, making that survival motive obsolete. But what comes after that event horizon?
When our whole society, which is built on allocating scarce human labor, suddenly finds its entire foundation is gone.
He admits the answer is unknown. The implication seems to be that our competitive energy will have to be redirected entirely.
Toward what, though?
Towards non-essential pursuits. Art, exploration, maybe complex, self-imposed challenges. Things we do for the sake of doing them, not because we have to.
Okay, so if that timeline holds and work becomes optional, the traditional concept of income also just dissolves. Which brings us past the usual debate about universal basic income, or UBI,
Way past it.
and straight into his proposed solution, universal high income, UHI.
And we have to be really clear about the distinction here, because this is where his prediction veers way off from traditional welfare discussions. UBI suggests a floor, right?
Enough to cover the basics, food, shelter.
Exactly. Enough income for basic necessities. UHI, which is driven by this idea of post-scarcity, implies something so much greater.
So what's the qualitative difference for you, the listener? How does that feel different?
UHI suggests that productivity will be so astronomical, driven by a near-zero marginal cost of production, that scarcity effectively vanishes. It means you have access to any goods and services you desire. It's an if you can think of it, you can have it type of thing.
So not just basics. We're talking luxury goods, specialized services.
Yeah, high-end travel, bespoke products, anything. The automation is so complete that the cost of producing even highly specialized items just approaches zero.
Which in turn completely upends the fundamental definition of money.
Absolutely. Musk argues that money isn't inherently valuable. He says it's really an information system for labor allocation.
Just a tool?
It's the mechanism we use to incentivize scarce human time and effort and point it towards tasks that need doing.
And this is perfectly illustrated by his desert island example.
Right. You could be stranded on a remote island with a vault that has $1 trillion in it. That money is utterly useless.
Because there's no one to work for it.
There's no human labor to allocate. So if AI and robotics can satisfy all human needs on their own, money loses its entire practical function. It's no longer needed to allocate human effort. It becomes a ledger with nothing left to measure.
And the long-term prediction there, that money as a concept just disappears.
That's the end goal of the singularity. He sees money eventually becoming irrelevant, maybe replaced by what he calls a physics-based currency. The idea is that any real currency has to be based on something you can't just legislate into existence.
Something tangible.
Right, like energy or fundamental resources, which we can get into in a moment. But the core concept is, once labor is infinite, the system we designed to measure and incentivize scarce labor becomes redundant.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting because he connects this huge technological leap to high-stakes global economics. Musk doesn't just predict prosperity. He directly ties this shift to solving the biggest structural problem in the Western world.
The U.S. national debt.
The U.S. national debt. He says this transformation is the only thing that will solve it.
Which is an astonishing claim, because the current situation is already, frankly, dire. The source really highlights how serious this is. Interest payments on the current U.S. debt are, in his words, insanely high.
They exceed the entire military budget now.
They exceed the entire military budget.
Yeah.
And that creates this vicious feedback loop where rising interest rates just consume more and more of the federal budget, crowding out everything else.
So if political maneuvering and painful austerity haven't fixed it, how does a massive surge in automated output fix trillions in sovereign debt? And more importantly, the timeline for this is even more aggressive.
It is.
3 years or less for the key turning point.
The mechanism is deflation. But it's deflation driven by something unprecedented. The speed and scale of AI and robot production. Let's look at the basic mechanics. Inflation or deflation is just the ratio between the total volume of goods and services produced.
And the change in the money supply.
Right. And usually, governments and central banks try to make sure the money supply grows at a certain rate to keep things stable.
But AI doesn't follow any historical supply curve.
Exactly. AI and robotics don't just increase output a little bit, they introduce an exponential curve. They drive the marginal cost of production for nearly everything, from cars to housing to computer chips, down towards zero.
And his prediction is that the rate of growth of all that stuff, all those goods and services, will very soon exceed the rate of growth of the money supply.
He estimates this inflection point, where goods production outpaces money supply growth, will happen in about 3 years or less.
Wait a minute, 3 years? That just seems impossibly fast. Even if output goes vertical, wouldn't institutional inertia and the sheer volume of global capital prevent deflation from taking hold that quickly?
Well, he argues that the speed of AI deployment is the key difference. Unlike past industrial revolutions that took decades to roll out infrastructure.
Like railroads or the internet.
Right. AI can scale almost instantly, and robots like Optimus can reproduce and deploy themselves rapidly. Once that zero marginal cost production cycle begins, meaning robots are building the solar panels, the chips, and more robots, the flood of goods will be instantaneous. It will be overwhelming on a scale we've just never modeled.
And so what's the specific consequence of that radical deflation on the debt rates? How does that work?
Deflation causes interest rates to jump, often towards zero, because there's no inflation being required anymore. So when the total value of the economy, the sheer volume of goods and services explodes upward, the trillions of dollars of debt, the number is the same, become a vastly smaller problem in real terms.
Relative to the size of the whole economy.
Exactly. The debt is effectively deflated away by gargantuan productivity gains. It's not paid off by taxpayers. It's an economic escape hatch driven purely by technology.
That is just a staggering bet on innovation trumping institutional failure. It suggests the U.S. government gets saved by a flood of cheap robots, not by any policies.
It almost necessitates that view. I think he believes that in the face of exponential technology, our incremental policy adjustments are simply irrelevant. The supersonic tsunami of productivity just washes away all the old economic models.
Moving to the truly long term, then, if money eventually dissolves because labor is infinite and debt dissolves because goods are abundant, the sources argue that some fundamental currency has to remain. What does Musk identify as the true?
He argues that it has to be energy.
Energy.
Unlike financial instruments, you can't legislate energy into existence. You have to physically extract it, harness it, and convert it into useful work. He says even systems like Bitcoin are ultimately based on the energy required for all that computation. Energy is the fundamental limiter of what we can do outside of physics itself.
And this connects directly to how he frames civilizational progress.
It does. He frames it using a paraphrased version of the Kadesh scale, which is a metric astrophysicists use to categorize how advanced a civilization is based on the energy it can harness.
Okay.
So a Type 1 civilization harnesses a significant percentage of its home planet's available energy. A Type 2 controls a percentage of its star's energy. And a Type 3, way in the future, controls a percentage of its entire galaxy's energy.
So progress isn't measured by GDP or accumulated wealth, it's measured by energy conversion.
Exactly. Progress is measured by the ability to convert fundamental energy into useful work. It provides a non-legislatable, physics-based metric for expansion.
But then we hit another paradox, don't we? If his long-term vision of deep space solar power and AI-driven mining comes true, doesn't energy itself also become functionally infinite and abundant?
It does. And if energy becomes infinite, he notes, then even energy ceases to be a viable store of wealth. And this leads to the ultimate state of decoupling. The monetary system, the labor system, and eventually even the energy storage system. They're all rendered obsolete as constraints.
And what's the final key that unlocks that state?
It happens when AI and robotics achieve a fully self-sustaining cycle. They're producing their own chips, their own solar panels, mining all the resources they need, and building more complex robots. Once that cycle is autonomous and infinite, the system is fully decoupled from any conventional human economic constraints. You've achieved the ultimate machine economy.
This has been a truly mind-bending deep dive. It forces us to consider a technological future that just breaks every economic assumption we hold dear. So to recap the key takeaways for you, the listener.
First, Musk predicts that this supersonic tsunami of AI and robotics will make human work entirely optional in roughly 10 to 20 years. Labor shifts from a survival necessity to a personal hobby.
Second, the immense U.S. debt crisis, with interest payments now exceeding the entire military budget, will be solved not by policy or pain, but by technology-driven deflation. He forecasts that the output of goods and services will outstrip money supply growth in 3 years or less, forcing interest rates towards zero and deflating the real burden of that debt.
And finally, money itself yields to energy as the true physics-based currency of civilization. Although even energy status as a store of wealth becomes precarious once AI creates these self-sustaining production cycles in deep space.
So the ultimate question these sources leave us with is one of purpose.